Hello. Uh, Clock on the wall says it's 6:30, so it's time for us to start the NERx. The third day of the NERx, and today's sponsor is Interaction Hobbies. They will be having uh, a giveaway, the drawing at 10 o'clock tonight, and the information for that is in the description of this video, so you can look it up there. And the first clinic tonight is uh, Bruce DeYoung, MMR, and his clinic is Railroads and the Natural Ice Industry, a symbiotic relationship. So it's springtime, let's talk about ice. Here's Bruce.
Hello. First, I want to say hi to all my friends in the NER and especially in the Garden State Division. I guess I'm living proof that there is life beyond New Jersey. So here we are now in Southeast Michigan. I have a great division here in the NMRA, Division 8, a lot of friendly guys. And tonight's clinic, some of you might have seen it when we had the Northeast region meeting in Mahwah, New Jersey. That was the year I moved from Jersey out here to Michigan. But I have added slides and updated it. Research is part of the fun I get out of the hobby. And I like researching large industries that depended on the railroads and no longer exist. And the ice industry in its heyday, which was late 1800s, early 1900s, was a top 10 industry in the United States in terms of employment, in terms of revenues, et cetera. And it had a tremendous impact on the way citizens lived, because finally ice was able to be delivered to the home. And that did not exist prior to the late 1800s. So this clinic will kind of detail the history of the ice industry, how the railroads got involved, and why I call it a symbiotic relationship. So Speed, you can start the clinic. Hello, I'm Bruce DeYoung. I was a 72-year member of the Northern New Jersey Railroad aficionados. And about 6 or 7 years ago, my wife and I moved to Southeast Michigan, and I'm now a member of the Division 8, the North Central region. So I want to start by just saying hi to all my friends in the NER, and in particular, the Garden State Division. The topic that we're going to be dealing with in this clinic is the relationship between the railroads and the natural ice industry. And as the clinic proceeds, you're going to see that it was a truly symbiotic relationship. And that means the ice industry was good for the railroads, and the railroad was good for the ice industry. I love to do research on topics like this, and what I'm going to share with you is a few of the best resources out there. The frozen water trade really is somewhat of a biography of Frederick Tudor, who lived in Massachusetts, who was a visionary and really looked ahead and saw an industry where no such industry existed before. He looked at the ice blocks that they were cutting from the local ponds and saying, we can sell this worldwide. Remember, this is just after the Civil War, and there was no refrigeration. And this would change the way people live. This is an excellent resource. You'll probably be able to find it in your local library, but it certainly is available online. Other resources that I found helpful is this little book, paperback book on America's Icemen, which really looks at the delivery side of the natural ice industry. And this little pamphlet, which was put out by the U.S. government print office, which looked at the ice industry in the United States, and an excellent resource. And the reason that the government printing office actually took the time to do this was, while this industry existed, it was one of the top 10 industries in the United States as measured by employment figures and monetary figures. After we moved to Michigan, looking around at places we might want to visit just to get familiar with, our new state, I came across a natural ice museum in Port Huron, Michigan, which is right on the river where you have Lake Huron emptying into Lake Erie. And this museum was actually featured the collection of implements from cutting natural ice off of lakes and ponds that was collected by a man who made a small fortune in the ice industry, but using mechanized ice making. And this is just an unbelievable resource. I have a lot of pictures in this PowerPoint from that museum. Let's look at the process of harvesting natural ice. Now, before it became an industry, with people selling this commercially, a lot of farmers had ice ponds and would cut ice in the winter just for their personal use. But we're going to be looking at what happened once Frederick Tudor turned it into actually an international business. You look at that surface, that's a little on the rough side for ice, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Throughout this PowerPoint, I have some of these screens called factoids, which just brings up interesting facts about the industry. We're looking at the time period from the early 1800s up until the 1930s. This thing started in, kind of a jerky way and had some failures up front, and then the Civil War intervened and so forth. So for the most part, it really, really grew post-Civil War up until the 1930s. Even though mechanized ice production came to the United States in the 1920s, there's examples of natural ice still being cut in large scale into the 30s. For instance, I came across the fact that in 1932, the Lake George Ice Company, so cutting ice off of Lake George in New York State, harvested 20,000 tons of ice for use by the D&H Railroad. Initially, this industry was all manpower and draft animals. There was no mechanization back in the 1800s. Eventually, just about the time it was too late to matter, parts of this became mechanized. We'll look at a little bit of that. And the reason I say it came about just almost when it didn't matter was just about the time they started mechanizing the cutting of the natural ice, they also developed the mechanized way of producing ice. Fear of pollution and mechanized ice production ended this era. Still a few places, little towns here and there throughout New England and New York State, and even out here in Michigan, where ice used to be cut from ponds, they still have reenactments of that in the winter. You might be able to find one near you. Let's look at the process, preparing the ice. If it was snow covered, you need to plow it off. So they needed implements to do that. If it was very rough, they would plane the surface to make it smooth. And that had to do with stacking blocks on top of each other. The less air that existed between the blocks, the less melting there would be. They standardized the size of these blocks pretty early on. So typical ice block was 22 inches by 32 and at least 6 inches thick. And of course, that depended on the winter and how thick the ice got. I've seen this poster in a number of museums, even local little museums, like our town in West Milford, New Jersey, had this poster up. It kind of shows a variety of implements that were used in the natural ice industry. So you have the horse-drawn snowplow, and, cutter planes, and etching planes, and all kinds of things, hand saws, a variety of tools to break the blocks apart, and so forth. This is a picture of hand implements from that ice museum in Port Huron. And I'm going to share more of these with you than maybe you even care to see. But I think what it indicates is not only the variety of tools that were necessary, but also the scope of this industry. To support this industry, you needed other industries making these saws, these tongs, these pry bars, et cetera, et cetera. So, like many, many industries, as one grows larger and succeeds, many smaller industries grow up around it. Again, saws, hand saws, and ice tongs, and you can see a pick in the middle going down between those two photographs. Um, Augers and some shovels in there. I show this because if you think about starting cutting, you walk out onto a lake and it's solid ice and you want to start cutting ice blocks, you need a way to get that cut started. And you see those big curved saws, and you can just picture how that would allow you to stand on the surface of the ice and begin to score it and cut down until the point where you could break through and use one of the other types of saws. In this picture, we're starting to see some of the horse-drawn implements that were used to cut ice. And in the lower right, you see some horseshoes. They had horses out on the ice, and you talk about side industries. So the guys making horseshoes had to start making horseshoes with spikes on the bottom so that the horses wouldn't slip on the ice and so forth. More implements to separate the ice. Here's a two-bladed cutter, and it would be horse-drawn with a man walking behind it, and a slush shovel or rake, if you want, in the right-hand side there. This is a great view of a lot of cutters. Once you got the first score done, you could use that tool in the foreground that has one non-serrated blade and another cutting blade. You put the non-serrated blade into the cut you've already made and use that as your guide, and that's going to give you that 22-inch wide block of ice that you want. You can see that the cutter blades on that tool are very shallow. The one behind it a little bit deeper, one behind that deeper yet. And you can kind of get the process. You get the score going, then you keep deepening it. Typically, other than the first cut all the way around, they would not cut all the way through because you needed to be able to walk on the ice that remains. And so you would cut almost all the way through and then use some of those pry bars and other tools you saw. Additional tools, and again, the metal industry and the wood industry to get those ash handles and so forth, all building up around the ice industry. More of those cutters. This guy really collected one heck of a lot of things. He went all around the United States, in the upper half of the United States and lower Canada, collecting these things before they disappeared. Some of those tongs are big enough that they were probably hanging off of a beam on top of an ice house to carry the blocks up. Other ones are small enough to be used by a man. Here's a lot of those pry bars. You get the idea. You've cut through this block and now you want to break it all the way through and loosen it up. Very, very labor intensive. And that's one of the reasons why it probably grew up into one of the top 10 from the employment side. And it was good for, farmers and other people, carpenters and woodsmen who had plenty to do during the warm weather, but during the cold winter were pretty much unemployed, and they could find employment in the natural ice industry. It was very beneficial. Bunch more tools. Okay. First step is you're laying out the long, I'm going to call them vertical here because of our point of view, vertical lines, and you see a guy behind the horse there with a single cutter. Once you got those vertical lines, then you want to do the cross hatching. And now you're determining, that 22 by 30 whatever inch blocks of ice. And you can see that the horses are still standing on that. That shows you that they're not cutting all the way through. And here they are using a bunch of those tools to loosen up the ice blocks. And Yeah, one can only surmise how many guys got a good ice cold dunking on a regular basis working on this job. And they probably had enough horses go through the ice that they got adept at yanking them out as well. So yeah, lots of things in these old industries that wouldn't pass OSHA muster today, that's for sure. Um, they would create, this might very well be on Lake Erie, but they created a channel that they could then start pushing those blocks of ice to the shore where they'd be picked up and loaded into an ice house, which we'll see that process in a little while. And although the cutting of the ice, from what I could read, obviously would halt during once it got dark out, they did have guys there all night long keeping that channel open. Here's a drawing of ice harvesting in process, and you can see the cross hatching and the use of the horses and um, so forth. And there's ice house right on the shore. Excuse me. And again, that was fairly typical. If you had a lake like Lake Hopatcong or Greenwood Lake in New York, or the Finger Lakes and so forth, there would be the shoreline would be loaded with ice houses, and that way they did not have to transport the ice to get them into the ice house. They floated it right up to a ramp, and that had a conveyor, and that conveyor could be adjusted as to what floor of the ice house it was going to load things in. You'll see a little bit more of that process later on. You also see all the horses all over the ice, and from what limited experience most of us have with horses, like the horse-drawn carriages in a Charleston, South Carolina, or whatever, you know that there's horse manure all over the place, and that included on this ice, which even though they had youngsters going about with sleds and shovels to pick it up, um, when you see the ads for the pure ice, just chuckle a little bit to yourself and imagine some Southern belle in South Carolina in the summer enjoying a mint julep with a big chunk of ice in it. Um, what a time. All right. By the later half of the 1800s, thousands of Americans were employed in the natural ice industry and the ancillary industries that supported it. In its prime, as I've already mentioned, it's one of the top 10 industries in the United States. The U.S. government printing office opined that it's remarkable that in some communities across the U.S. they pay out as much money for ice in a given year as they do for fuel. Well, if you're in the South, you're not going to need much fuel in the winter as compared to ice in the summer, so it's not all that surprising. In 1879 to 1880, the total consumption of natural ice in the U.S. was estimated to be between 5 and 5.25 million tons. The ice harvest to accomplish this, allowing for melting, would have been between 7.8 and 8.2 million tons of ice. I think you can start to see why the ice industry turned to the railroads to transport this stuff. Uh, Here's another picture of an ice house on the shore of an ice cutting lake. I think that's the Knickerbocker Ice Company, big in New York State. And you can see those elevators that are carrying the ice up into the ice house. And like I say, they could be adjusted. You bring the ice in on the ground floor first, and once that whole floor is covered, then you raise it a little bit and bring the ice blocks in and slide them across and create a second level and so forth, all the way up to the top. Here's a lake with a couple of ice houses, and you start to get this view for the size of these ice houses. But if you think of the million tons of ice that were being cut and stored, you can start to get an idea of how many ice houses were built. Almost all out of wood. Um, not all, but almost all. By 1886, the natural ice industry had reached an annual yield of 25 million tons. Started to catch on. I mean, it was changing the way people lived. Prior to that, meat either had to be salted, dried, um, or used very quickly. And the same thing is true of lots of other food that we were eating. Um, you just couldn't keep that stuff in its natural state. We're so spoiled by refrigerators and freezers that it's hard to imagine that up until about the time my parents were born, most people were still just having ice boxes with blocks of ice in it. As I said, some of this started to get mechanized, and here's a radial saw for cutting ice, powered by a hit and miss engine, and nice setup there. And again, must have come out just around the time that mechanized ice production also came out. So this aspect of the industry did not grow all that much. This saw was up in that ice museum in Fort Huron, Michigan. As you look at the way we depict the natural ice industry, or just actually the ice industry, but even after it became mechanized, on our layouts, is usually well after the ice had been harvested and transported. This little module is one of the few representations that I have seen that actually shows ice harvesting in process. And it is a module that belongs to the Great Lakes HON30 modular group, and I think they quite frequently just have they set up their modules at the Springfield show, so you might have come across that group before. But that's about the only place I actually saw this aspect of the industry being modeled, um, on our layouts or on our modules. Another picture of an ice house. This one being fed by an elevator only on one side. Ice houses with capacities up to 100,000 tons of ice were constructed on the lakes and the rivers, because they weren't only cutting ice on the lakes, they were cutting ice on many of the rivers up in Maine and on the Connecticut River and lots of rivers. This is Kennebuck, Maine. This ice house, just look at the size of that. As you read that book about Frederick Tudor, you will find out he started on some small ponds in Massachusetts, but about every second or third winter would be what they would call an open winter. In other words, it was a winter where it never got cold enough for the ponds to freeze thick enough to give them the ice harvest that they needed. And so as his company grew and the demand grew, he kept looking for ice further north in New England, particularly. So Tudor basically stayed in New England. And so, yeah, I think if you read the book, it was either every second or third winter would be warm enough not to give them the ice down in mass. As I said before, almost all the ice houses were made out of wood, but here's a clay tile octagon-shaped one in Iowa. Now, if you know much about Iowa, you know they do their own thing architecturally on barns and apparently on ice houses too. Octagons were one of their favorite shapes for constructing big buildings. There's another good-sized ice house. Just think of the labor going into building all these things and the lumber. This is the kind of thing that really, boosts an economy because everything grows up around it. This is a modest ice house. This would be something that might be used by a particular industry, that you would be using ice in meat industry or something like that. This kind of shows you what's going on inside where the ice blocks come down. And you can see they're walking on one layer of ice and the blocks are coming down and they're pushing them with poles around that surface until they get that level and then raise those boards and so forth right up to the top. I believe they would throw down straw from time to time between the layers or sawdust, whatever, but for the most part, this is what you would see. This one is out in Colorado, so any of the northern states would have had the ice industry. There you see a railroad backing right up to that ice storage facility. I get a kick out of pictures of structures that have burned down because it shows you what the inside looked like. I have done a lot of research because one of my two railroads that I'm building is Slate Run Railroad from Pennsylvania. It was a lumber railroad, but also served the wood chemical industry, the kindling industry, the tanning industry, and so forth. And I've seen pictures of kindling factories that burned down, and you can see what was inside, or a wood chemical plant that burned down, or even a sawmill that burned down. A lot of these things burn down all the time. Now, a wood structure with the walls packed with sawdust or straw right next to the tracks, that's the Lackawanna Railroad tracks there in Lake Hopatcong. Good chance it was set on fire by sparks from one of the steam locomotives. And what you have left is ice and a dividing wall you can see there. I can remember my father telling me about him seeing an ice house catch fire and burn to the ground near Hawthorne, New Jersey. That's the northern part of New Jersey. And he said after the fire was out, the ice block stood there all summer long and into the next winter. So I'll give you an idea. I mean, it's just unbelievable the amount of ice that they'd have stored. And this is only one of thousands and thousands of ice houses around. Looks like the heat might have done a job on that track in the foreground. Most of the ice houses that we see on our model railroads are smaller than the ones that would be on the lakes or rivers. And they would typically serve either the railroad itself, because they were big users of ice, or creameries or any other of the industries that popped up that started using ice. So this is a small ice house that I built from plans that were in the 1992 Railroad Model Craftsman, and it was based on a O&W ice house. The O&W had two standard size ice houses, and I believe this is the smaller of the two. This one is on Andy's layout outside of Albany, New York. When I was at one of the NER conventions up there, his layout was open, and I took this picture of a nice small ice house attached to a creamery. This one was on Lou Sassi's layout when his was up near Albany as well. Harold Worthwine from northern New Jersey. Many of you are familiar with him. This was an ice house next to a Borden's Creamery. Those are the kinds of ice houses typically I see as I visit layouts. A lot of kit companies do have ice houses. This is a branch line model. And another model available in both HO and O scale. All right, let's talk about transporting the natural ice, and here's where railroads really get involved. In the beginning, it would be horse-drawn wagons for local deliveries. Clearly, the railroads to get this ice from the northern tier of the country all over the rest of the country. And Frederick Tudor had quite a fleet of sailing ships in Boston, and he shipped, believe it or not, I'll show you a map in a little while, all the way around the bottom horn of Africa and well down into South America, all through the Caribbean and so forth. There's his map. The star up in the States there is Boston. And you see he had routes going to all the southern states on the eastern and Gulf sides, down into the Caribbean, the bigger cities in South America. down around Africa and over to India and Australia and every place else. He made eventually a decent fortune out of selling ice off of ponds and lakes and rivers. His first attempt, because they all thought he was crazy. You're going to pack, a small schooner full of ice and sail it down to Cuba. Oh yeah, that was his plan. And he didn't own any ships, but he found a captain that was willing to do it. And believe it or not, there was some melting, obviously, but it wasn't bad. Still had a heck of a lot of ice available, which he offloaded there, and then found out they had no place really to store it. And so, it quickly melted, and he realized that if this was going to be successful, he not only had to worry about how to produce the ice, how to transport the ice, but also how to store it. And he came up with solutions. Went bankrupt a few times, had to hide from the authorities, eventually persevered and became unbelievably successful. Here's a picture of Tudor Wharf in Boston. And you can see along the tracks in the background, that's the ice storage facility. And the railroad's going right up to it. And sailing ship days, so those are transporting his ice. Great book. I really can recommend it. In the beginning, ice, was, especially if it was being transported in the winter, they just used regular boxcars, loaded them in, and as much as the boxcar could hold weight-wise. And quite frankly, probably weight was the limiting factor back then. Another picture of them. This one to me looks like the railroad is pretty close to one of the lakes. Typically in the time period we're looking at for the natural ice, the boxcars held from 40 to 60 tons of ice each. This is another picture. This, I believe, is in New York State. And you can see them loading, I think, ice into the boxcars, not out of. Just more of that. That's in Sandusky. That's probably along Lake Erie. And this one is in the 1880s. You can see the Chicago and St. Paul boxcar in the lower right-hand corner there. And again, just to get an idea of how much ice was being transported, I found this factoid. During the late 1800s, trains pulling 50 boxcars each loaded with ice left Milton, New Hampshire every day during the summer. You start to get an idea of the traffic, railroad traffic that this was generating. During one hot spell, another factoid I found in one of the publications, Sanbornville, New Hampshire shipped 912 boxcars of ice, each holding 45 to 60 tons over a 9-week period. Although I found many examples of railroads building sidings or spurs, branch lines even, just for the purpose of picking up ice, going over to ice houses. I actually found 2 examples of railroads, entire railroads, that were created solely or primarily for transporting ice. And one was this Macoupin Lake Railroad. I was keen on this one because my wife and I lived for 40-some years in the Macoupin section of West Milford, New Jersey, very northern part of the state, right against the New York border. And the Macoupin Lake Railroad, as you can see, was only a 1.5 mile, eventually it became a branch of the Susquehanna, but a 1.5 mile railroad that was built as the Macoupin Lake Railroad. And it had 2 things. It had in the summer, I think there was a hotel up there and a dance pavilion and stuff. And so there'd be some excursion use for people from the cities in New Jersey and from New York City to come up for recreation during the summer. But it also had a 100,000 ton capacity ice house. And it shipped hundreds of loads of ice down to the Susquehanna Railroad. And if you know that area at all, the Susquehanna there runs right next to Route 23. And it was right there where the junction was. And that is a steep climb from where the lake is down to the level of the Susquehanna Railroad. And this is in the time period of handbrakes on individual cars. And I read a piece by a guy who actually was a brakeman on that railroad, on that run. And he would say they would, as they pulled away from the ice house and started down the slope, they would lock every brake on every car. And this train would still slide all the way down to the Susquehanna main line. And that they would have the main line blocked. And that train would slide, coast, whatever you want to call it, out onto the main line until they were able to get it stopped. And interesting times. But anyway, in 1900, Newark, the city, purchased Macoupin Lake along with a number of other lakes in West Milford as reservoirs to supply drinking water. And they no longer allowed the lake to be used for bathing, but ice harvesting was continued until in 1926 when mechanized ice was well in production. So yeah, railroads were built specifically for the ice industry. I think there was a little political shenanigans going on here because the principles behind building the Macoupin Lake Railroad were all politicians, and it was pretty much assured that the Susquehanna would buy the railroad and people would make money, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, nice little fact. And we talked about on our layouts and modules what we normally see. We see plenty of ice houses, but you also see plenty of icing facilities, like this prototype photo. Because even well after the time period where ice was being made mechanically, railroads were still using facilities like that to pack their refrigerator cars with ice. Now here's where the symbiotic relationship really starts to take place. Ice became available, distributed by the railroads. The brewing industries in the Midwest and throughout the United States grew as a result of the consistent availability of ice. Previous to that availability, lager beer was made only during the cold months. Lager beer is brewed at cool temperatures in the 50s, and ales can be brewed at room temperature. But all of your major brands of beer are lagers. I mean, you know, if you're drinking Budweiser or Coors or Miller, you're drinking lagers. And they were only being made in the cold months. It was a seasonal thing. So once the ice became available, they could cool down their facilities and they could brew the lagers year round, which means they needed the grains year round. They needed the hops year round. They needed the containers year round. So and then once they had it, they would ship the stuff out. So all of this was adding to the tonnage being transported by the railroads. So the brewing industry blossomed. The meatpacking industry became a national industry. As we talked about, prior to that, meatpacking was drying or salting and was localized. But the meatpacking industry boomed because of ice. And you had national concerns spring up like Hormel and Armour and Swift. And all of those became big customers of the railroads, both in raw materials in and product out. Fruits and vegetables were now being shipped across the country. All of this resulted really from Frederick Tudor having an idea. Here's a picture of an icing facility on a railroad, and you know that they don't put the full chunks of ice into the refrigerator cars. They break it up into chunks because it's the melting that brings down the temperature quickly. And you know, they'll chop it up, they'll throw some salt in there and enhance the salting and lower the temps and so forth. Here you see in this facility in Port Huron, an icing facility where those carts already have chopped ice in it, so you can dump it right into the refrigerator cars. Another icing facility. The Brookside ice house and loading platform was put out by JL Innovative. It's a small one, so it'll fit on a lot of our layouts. And this is the actual prototype for that kit. And a lot of manufacturers have kits out there for icing facilities, and HONO. Plenty of those. Here's a double one on each side of the track. GG laser, N scale. On my layout back in New Jersey before I tore it down, the representation of ice was an ice house and this refrigerator car for the Macapan Lake Railroad, and probably never owned. Matter of fact, I know the Macapan Lake Railroad never owned any rolling stock whatsoever. No locomotives. Everything was always Susquehanna. But it's my railroad, and I wanted it. Matt Thompson's layout, you start to see how big some of these get. Here in Michigan, Brooke and Jay Qualman, Michigan lines, they had this ice house there. What a fabulous layout that is. I think Doug is up near Albany. This will give you an idea of the size of his icing platform. Every once in a while, and you're visiting a layout, you'll see a really spectacular one, really built in large scale. How about that one? And this was a module at one of the national conventions, very nicely detailed, showing what was going on in the process of loading up these Northern Pacific refrigerator cars. So typically, that's kind of what you see on layouts, either, as far as any tip of the hat to the ice industry, will either be icing platforms or ice houses. And again, ultimately, they mechanized the whole thing of taking ice, chopping it up, loading the refrigerator cars. And again, that was just around the time where they came with refrigeration units for each car. On the distribution side, these are the ice houses that our grandparents used. Not ice houses, ice boxes. I'm old enough to remember my maternal grandmother had an ice box still in her kitchen up until the very early 1960s. And part of that was she did not own the house she was in, and the landlord did not modernize the house until I guess maybe 1963 or 1964. So up until that point, she still had a coal stove in the kitchen that she cooked on, and she had an ice box. And I can remember the iceman coming, and there was a door in the side of the house that backed into, connected to a door in the back of the ice house, ice box, so that the iceman could shove a chunk of ice into that ice box without ever coming into the kitchen. So ice was not routinely used in the households until the mid 1800s, and then you started getting another industry popping up. First of all, the industry of building ice boxes, but also the home delivery of ice, which was a big thing. It's fine to get the ice from the Knickerbocker Ice Company, on Lake Champlain to deliver ice to a big ice house in New York City, but then somehow you had to get it into all of the apartments and so forth in New York City. And so the Iceman cometh, and all kinds of advertising. You would think ice is pretty standard commodity. Ice is ice, but boy, they always wanted to try to make their ice look better than the next guy. So this one was advertising pure Connecticut River ice. What could be purer than the water in the Connecticut River? I am sure there were no upriver industries dumping stuff into that river. It's all pure Connecticut River water, better than the other guys. Oh, except for maybe the Hapatcong Ice Company had the best quality. I don't know. But Their ad says down near the bottom, from 100 tons to the wants of a small family at market price. So if you were an industry using ice, you could get it through the Hapatcong Ice Company, or if you were just grandma, you could get your ice through the Hapatcong Ice Company. And again, in the beginning, it was all horse and buggy delivery. This is how ice delivery companies integrated with grandma. They did not have to first come up to the door, knock on the door and say, how much ice do you want today? And then walk back and get that ice. They could give grandma one of these cards, which she would put in the front window where the iceman could see it. And whichever number was up is what she would deliver. You want 25 pounds of ice, you put the 25 up. You want 50 pounds of ice, you put the 50 up. And every ice company had their own variation on that theme. This is again from that museum in Port Huron. What a treasure, finding that. I had this clinic done before then, but boy, did that warrant some big revisions to the clinic. Port Huron Ice Company. Phone number 560. Oh, that kind of puts a time period on it. Oftentimes, ice, coal, and lumber, all those kind of things went together in small communities. You make a pond ice. I don't know if that's from New York State, that Jamaica, who knows? Probably many Jamaicas around. And then, of course, once horse and buggy was failing, they still were delivering ice. And here's a Ford truck made out for the Hogan and Ripple Ice Company. Here's a classic truck, phone number 429. And if you like Art Deco, Oscar Mayer was selling ice. They were probably by this time producing their own ice mechanically for their meat business, and they were selling ice. And ice delivery was so commonplace that you saw it pop up in advertising for other things. So here's an iceman delivering ice to this young lady and advertising the Iowa State Fair. And apparently he's chatting long enough that his ice cube has totally melted. So that's it, folks. It was an industry that grew in the mind of Frederick Tudor, blossomed, became one of the top 10 industries in the United States, changed the way Americans and folks all around the world lived, and then disappeared, as is the case of so many of those old industries, each of which is fair game for a great clinic. Hope you enjoyed this, and perhaps I'll see you at the National Convention this year, which is about 40 minutes from my house. I'll be giving a few clinics. Maybe I can catch up with some old friends then. Thanks a lot. Let's summarize with one last thing here. We talked about symbiotic relationship, and it's the beneficial relationship between different peoples or groups. So the ice industry needed railroads to transport their product to the ice houses, the sailing ships, and large customers. The brewing industry began to grow. They brew year round, and they began to use the railroads to ship their product to market. The railroads brought the ice and all their other products to them. Meat processing, same thing. We talked about this. They grew so large, they became huge customers of the railroads. And the ice railroads, of course, used ice to refrigerate the meat. So railroads helped the ice industry grow. Ice industry helped the railroads grow. Symbiotic. Take care.
Okay, welcome back. I see that we have a lot of questions, and thank you for a wonderful clinic, Bruce. That was really
You're welcome.
very good. So are you up for some of these hard-hitting questions?
As good as any 78-year-old can be.
All right. Let's see. One of the questions. Were ice houses only located by the source of ice, or did industries have their own ice houses?
Industries had their own, railroads had their own. So it would be very common, for instance, for a creamery to have an ice house built next to it, rail served. Um, Same thing with meat packing, same thing with brewing. They would have their own ice houses. So it's harvested, put in the ones right by the rivers or lakes, and then distributed out to these other ice houses as they need it. And again, back in the day, that distribution was done by rail.
And that's a lot of loading and unloading.
It is backbreaking work.
Let's see. Another question. How did a home signal that they needed ice, and how much would they ask for at a time?
Yeah, the ice companies developed a kind of a neat procedure. They would give the homeowner a placard that was about, I would say 6 inches by 6 inches. And in each diagonal corner would be a number like 10, 15, 20, 25. That would, depending on which one you put on top in the window, and you put it out in the window by the street. So if you had on the top the 10, that means you wanted 10 pounds of ice. If you wanted 25, it would be 25 pounds of ice. So they didn't have to first go in, knock on the door and say to Mama, how much ice do you need? And Mama put it in the window out by the street.
That's neat. So that's something for guys in larger scales could model that
Could model
on
that.
there.
Sure.
Yeah. Let's see. How much of the ice was used for human consumption, say in a drink or something, versus using it to keep something cold? And was contamination a concern?
Well, let's go back. The proportion of ice that was used for human consumption, I'll call it, in the beginning was probably higher than it became later on. Okay, I mean, as ice became available, people decided these are things I can do with this ice. So, like the meatpacking companies, like the breweries, and shipping vegetables and all that kind of stuff. So, in the end, most of it was being used for refrigeration. But in the beginning, it was the lure of, the Southern belles being able to sit around in the summer and enjoy their mint juleps with a little bit of ice in it and cool it down. And what they didn't know was that ice was harvested mostly with horses and oxen and so forth out on the ice, pulling the sleds and the cutters and the plows, and doing what horses do, which was defecating with some frequency. And they'd have all these the youngest employees, or the kids of the guys that were actually getting paid, were out there with shovels and stuff, scraping that stuff off the ice. But if you've ever spent much time on the ice, and like my dog used to come out on the ice, and if he decided it was time to do his business on the ice and you tried to pick it up, it usually left a big smear. Well, that smear would end up in that mint julep. And, ultimately, I don't know why more people didn't get sick, whether back then the antibodies we all had were stronger than what we have today, because we were all, at that time, many of you were drinking water that wasn't as pure as we have today. I have no clue. But it was pretty much the fear of pollution and so forth that was competing neck and neck with the mechanization of making ice that put the natural ice industry out of business. There was a growing fear of pollution, that's for sure, that was trapped in the ice. But they all claimed it was pure ice. If you saw some of those ads in the clinic, pure Lake Hopatcong ice, or clear Hudson River ice or whatever. Yeah.
Hmm. When uh, when railroads moved the ice, did it travel on regular freight trains or passenger trains, or was it dedicated, like a reefer train that was a little faster than a freight train, a little slower than a passenger train?
I'm not saying that there were no mixed trains that would have, one or two box cars. Typically, they used empty boxcars to move the ice from the ice house at the lake to the ice house of either the ice company in the city or one of the companies or whatever. But often they were dedicated trains, all ice, and going from one ice house to one or more ice houses. And I told the story, I think, in the clinic. In our hometown of West Milford, New Jersey, there was a lake called Macoupin Lake, and it was an ice harvesting lake. And there was a Macoupin Lake Railroad that was really a branch line to the Susquehanna. And it was quite steep uphill to the lake, and then, of course, downhill back down to the main line. And there was a story from one of the old timers that I came across where back in the days of the brakeman having to turn the brake on every car, when they got to the edge of the hill going down to the main line, they would set every brake on every car. And the thing would slide down the hill, picking up speed, and they had to block the main line so nobody was coming by. This train would go out onto the main line until it just kind of came to a stop. But the weight was such that, and the steepness was such that no sanding, no braking was going to hold this thing from sliding down the hill. Interesting.
I think we're running short on time, but thank you so much. And we had a lot of questions we couldn't get to, but thank you again for the wonderful clinic and really interesting subject.
You're very welcome.
Let's see, and next is Modeling Showcase.
Welcome to the 2025 NERx Model Showcase. Over the course of all 4 nights, you will have the opportunity to see all of the models submitted for the showcase. Let's check out Part 3. This scratch-built HO scale footbridge was built by Ed O'Rourke, a master model railroader from the Central New York Division. The model footbridge sits at the west end of the New Haven station on his layout. The steel girders and fencing are Central Valley products, the steps are Tichy. Modeled from a few very indistinct photos scaled to fit the space. The original spanned about 5 or 6 tracks. The structure was steel, but the walkway and fencing were wood, due to the 11,000 volt AC catenary below it. The pagoda roof tower is a plaster model, possibly from the Railway Design Associates, and the ash tower in the background is a Walthers product. This HO-scale Boley dump truck was built by Will Lawrence of the Eastern Canada Division. The model received a scratch-built dump body with retractable load cover, new headlights, paint, and weathering. This HO-scale board-by-board scratch-built model is by James Watley, a master model railroader in the Eastern Canada Division. James used field measurements and photographs of the prototype, which used to be located in the Canadian National Railways, Rockingham Yard, and Halifax, Nova Scotia, to make a drawing. The windows and details inside and out were also scratch-built. James used wood, cardstock, tissue paper, and solder to construct the oil tank, desk, chairs, key cabinet, and space heater. James' attention to detail also includes the safety notices on the bulletin board. The chimney is made from brick paper. Paul Dexter of the Hub Division built Helen's Rivera restaurant in HO scale. On his HO freelance layout, Paul repurposed this ancient HSM model cardboard kit of the historic Rivera station in California into a trackside restaurant. Paul modified the footprint, replacing the windows and doors with appropriate Tichy products, adding interior lighting, and adding a Santa Fe caboose dining room. The sign was custom crafted by his friend, Mike Tylick, which includes a picture of his wife, Helen, and she loves it. Mark Moritz of the Garden State Division built this HO-scale coal tower by Campbell's. Mark needed a coaling station for the engine service facility on his model railroad and decided to build the Campbell kit. It took him about a year to build because it was so complex he had to take breaks so as not to become discouraged. The kit was a literal box of sticks which builds into a model of the coaling station at either Durango or Chama, Colorado. Everything about it was old school. There were no laser cut pieces. In addition to the coaling station itself, there was a coal unloading pit which required construction from many pieces of wire. This entire project was one Mark will remember for a long time. And this ends part 3 of the NERx Model Showcase. The final installment is tomorrow evening.
Hello, welcome back. Those were really neat showcase images. And this is the roundtable section of our program. And this is the Computer Simulations Roundtable. And my name is Andy Estep. I'm on the board of directors of the Sunrise Trail Division of the NMRA. Our division covers Long Island and much of New York City. I'm also one of the founders of the Manhattan Modelers Special Interest Group of the NMRA, and our group is primarily focused on modelers who live in New York City and the surrounding areas. Lately, we have expanded to include some modelers who are interested in modeling the city as their chosen prototype. And I would stake claim that um, this is still a small space modeling because the prototype is and was small in New York City. Um, we have occasional meetings to share our modeling, layout visits, and field trips to historic prototype areas in the area. We also have a social media presence and put out a newsletter. Living in the city, most of the modelers here are space starved, so our focus is really on modelers without a lot of space. And I think that computer simulation would be an area that would fall into that category. Modeling in a computer space doesn't require any physical space outside of your computer. I don't Personally, I don't use any computer sims in my modeling, but I find the work that modelers are doing in it to be fascinating. I have two modelers with me today, Nick Ozeric and Javier Lopez, and I'd like to let them introduce themselves, starting with Nick.
Thank you, Andy. Yes, my name is Nick Ozrak, and I host the Roundhouse podcast, which you could find on the various platforms where podcasts are hosted, including our website, theroundhousepodcast.com. I cover a variety of topics in rail preservation, the freight railroad industry, musicians, artists, you name it, we discuss it. But my first claim to fame on the internet was being the creator of a YouTube series called At the Rail Yard, where I reviewed train simulator products with sort of a music video flair. And these days I'm known for my monthly live streams under the banner of Great Train Layouts Live, where we take model railroading track plans and build them in these train simulator environments.
Javier.
My name is Javier Lopez. I'm a member of the Oyster Bay Railroad Museum and also a CAD producer, modeling early HO scale, N scale, and 00 scale prototypes from England and the United States. I started a company called Barn Model Productions, which produces 3D models, which are able to be sold on various websites. So,
Well, I realized that you're both working in computer areas, Javier in CAD, and Nick in actual layout sims programs. If I could ask like a clarification, if anyone was watching this who was unfamiliar with the subject of layout sims or modeling using CAD as a primary tool, if you could clarify it, Nick.
Sure. So there's a multitude of train simulator platforms, and most of them tend to focus on modeling prototype railroads. So you have platforms like Microsoft Train Simulator, which goes all the way back to 2001, Trains spelled with a Z, and there's been multiple iterations of that over the past couple of decades. Train Simulator Classic, Train Sim World, and then some new softwares that have come onto the scene recently, Railroads Online and Railroader. Each tend to have a different focus in terms of the tools that are afforded to people using the platform. So most of them tend to focus with this assumption that you're building a one-to-one railroad, but some, like with Train Z, which I'll be showing some examples of my work tonight, there's ways in which people have retroactively made it to kind of be a model railroad simulator, if you will.
And Javier, are you modeling your CAD models? You're building them with the idea of actually eventually printing them out and having a physical model instead of building them for one of these sim programs. Is that right?
that's right,
Yeah.
Andy. Yeah. So the programs that I use typically Autodesk is AutoCAD. I work in various versions. I've worked since 2017 up till 2025, and these will typically be sort of similar in a way to if you were to manufacture during a injection mold process. I sort of think of it in that way. There's a lot of considerations, sort of the physical dimensions of the model, checking details, making sure that they would scale up correctly in each of these individual scales. And it's an interesting process when you get to look at it. It's sort of similar in a way to designing, I would say, like a microwave or something, more physical products.
Right. So you need to leave space for clearances it's different than you would if it was just using the physics of a sim computer program. When did users of these sims start modifying them for themselves versus just playing the game that the original simulators were intended for. Do you know?
Yeah, so with Microsoft Train Simulator was the turning point for when a lot of these modifications started to be feasible. Before then, you had train simulator platforms, but it was very much designed just for an end user. So there weren't editing tools afforded to be able to add in new locomotives or build new routes. Microsoft Train Simulator introduced software to be for end users to be able to create their own add-ons, as did Train Z when it came on the market a year later in 2002. So those are platforms, those are two of several platforms where this idea of people being able to add in the content, the trains and the routes that they wanted came into being. And because there was this thirst, I think, for people to make the most of these tools, this idea that you could capture an entire railroad without having to make any compression, because now all you were dealing with was pixels, appealed to a lot of people as a result. This idea that you could model a 120-mile subdivision of a railroad and have every single detail in there as much as you wanted. So that's something that's carried through in the spirit of a lot of the directions that people have gone with these programs.
Interesting. Do you, as a user of these sims, think of it as model railroading, or is it something else? Like, do you see them as completely separate practices? I know that you are both physical model railroaders as well. Is that a consideration of using these sims? Is it separate, or is it part of something else?
So if we could share my screen, I could talk about one of my projects. And this was actually the one project. Most of what I do are these train layouts that are, let's say, anything from a small shelf layout to a large basement. But this route that I built here a few years ago is a full representation of the 6-mile Wisbech and Upwell tramway, which was this offshoot branch line of the Great Eastern Railway in England. Its claim to fame, if you could tell from the locomotive in the screenshots, is that it's the source of Toby the Tram Engine from the Thomas the Tank Engine stories. Oh, thank you. I wasn't sure if that was an automatic process or not. Okay, so I will now turn that on, and now you should see it. Okay, so now you could see that this is the recreation that I did in the Train Z 19 simulator platform. And you could recognize that as the basis of Toby the Tram Engine. And so the thing is that there's definitely similarities to model railroading, even with something like this, because on the one hand, yes, space is unlimited. I was able to recreate a full 6 miles where you could do the math to convert that to your favorite scale. But I was still thinking about the concept of scenes. Even though I'm trying to replicate this railroad to the best of my abilities, there's still the idea of what makes an attractive scene as somebody is driving through this. And yes, I'm basing this off of photos, again, like model railroading. And so I'm trying to make it as realistic as possible. But there is still a mentality of, how are people going to enjoy this? Because I do see train simulators as sort of a method of storytelling, if you will. They're just a different medium for doing so. Because being able to engage with these historic railroads in train simulators changes your relationship to that history, because now instead of just reading a book on this railroad or seeing videos on it, it's something that you can actually play with on your computer. You can be faced with the same operational challenges that real engine crews would have faced back in the day of whatever it is that was being modeled. So there's a lot of similarities in the approach. It's really just that your end project is digital. Although, as we've seen with things like 3D printing, even that's become blurred. That line's been blurred.
Yeah. A quick question. Sorry to interrupt. Are you able to invite others to operate on your layout, possibly more than one person at a time?
That depends entirely on the platform. So unfortunately, with this platform, well, let me say yes and no. So can other people enjoy what I've created here? Yes. The answer is that this route and a bunch of the layouts that I've created on my live streams is available for people to download. This one is available on something called the Download Station, which is a part of the Train Z19 software. So you can download it and you can enjoy it on your own. If the question is, can you enjoy this in a multiplayer capacity? On this specific platform we're looking here, the answer is no. Trains 19 doesn't have that capability. There are, however, a few simulators that do offer you the opportunity to run trains with other people at the same time. So one of them that came out recently is called Railroader. It's set in the transition era on the Murphy branch of the Southern Railway. And that is something where you are able to interact with other trains, and you even have a CTC panel. So somebody can be dispatching and actually manipulating the signals on the layout. And then there's another software called Run 8, where people, that is set in modern day. And there's a few different routes available for that, but probably the one most people would recognize is the Tehachapi Loop. That area of California, people can run modern equipment with one another.
Very cool. Very cool. And oh, I recognize this layout from a magazine. This is Copperwort, yeah? Is that
Very
right?
good. Yes, this
Yeah.
is in fact Copperwort, originally designed by Peter Goss over in the UK. This was one of those cases where it was love at first sight. In terms of, I was featured in the Railway Modeler of April 2022. I saw it. I fell in love with it. I wanted to take it home with me. That's sort of a challenge because it's across the Atlantic Ocean and it's not mine. But what I could do was the next best thing and build my own version of it. And so I spent a few months in the sim trying to recreate this industrial beer centric, brewery centric layout that has one of the most interesting operational schemes I've ever encountered in model railroading. And in fact, just recently on my last live stream, and if you're looking for the live streams, you can go to greattrainlayouts.com. That's where I host these finished layouts, including this one here, as well as the live streams that I do every month. You can download this layout and play it in your copy of Trains 19, and you can see how it operates. And that's one of the things that I love about doing the live streams is the fact that it gives me an opportunity to not just build the plan out, but also play test it. And play test it with an audience where they can make their own suggestions. They can participate in the process of bringing this layout into a three-dimensional space.
And once you create one of these layouts, do you copy the exact track layout of that you see in the magazine of the layout? And is it a way of testing how it would operate, or um, once you're done making this layout, is it like, are you satisfied that you've done it? You don't actually have to create it physically.
So the process of bringing the layout in a nutshell, of bringing it into a digital space, is that I'll take a two-dimensional scan of the track plan and then use a software that turns that into a flat object within the train's surveyor, which is basically the layout editing tool. From that, I'm placing in the track, I'm placing in the buildings, the roads, the different ground textures. And so that's how a layout is brought into life. And it's a process. So it's a manual process, but the advantage is that then if there's changes that I want to make, because I'm playtesting and I realize, oh, this would work better if there was a crossover over here. This would work better if I had 2 extra sidings. Then I'm able to just make that change myself in the process of creating that. So a good example of that here, this is a layout originally by Tom Danneman, based on the Montana Rail Link. He designed this as a 12:6 N scale layout. And one of the changes that I made after constructing it's pretty faithful to his design. But if you look just to the left of the bridge, well, you see the bridge where that the train is crossing over in the foreground. Originally, that siding on the left just went from the 2 tunnels, merged into one central track, and then split for a second. There was a switch that went to that cement plant on the right hand, and then the main line curved and went into the backdrop. And I realized that the problem this created is that if you had a crew switching the cement plant, they would need head end room going out onto the main in order to work that industry. So I modified the track plan, and I just, instead of connecting it right at the main, I just ran that and connected it with that, with the junction where it goes from one main to main and passing siding. And the result being that now you could have 2 crews where one is operating on the main and one person is switching the cement plant. So even though this is a platform where, unfortunately, we're not able to have multiplayer operating sessions in this game, there's still a utility to having built it, because if I was going to contemplate building this layout in real life, then I would be able to know that that's something I'd want to do, because I've tested this out before I'm cutting my plywood. And to your question, Andy, about do I like have the temptation to build these in real life? Every single month I'm building one of these, and the temptation is there. Oh, this is a really cool plan, and I really wish I had, an airplane hangar to store all these layouts in. But I like to think of it as a way of seeing what operations resonate with me. Some layouts really stick with me months after I've completed them. I look back and I go, that I really like this element of this design, and others it's like, well, that was fun, but it's not something that I would feel tempted to build. So that's another way of kind of seeing what's going to stick.
Very cool. Very cool. Javier, I first met you in the depths of COVID lockdown through Gary Kemp's YouTube channel, The Oak Hill Works, which in the intervening years he's sadly stopped streaming. In those days, I enjoyed live dispatching his layout in England using the chat feature from my desk in Manhattan. Gary also has a very active Discord channel where, among other things, he shares build drawings for many British 19th century engines, wagons, and carriages. At the time, I was trying to make some O-scale London, Brighton, and South Coast carriages to pull with my Daypole A1X Terrier that I bought on a trip to England. I was fascinated with your CAD work once you shared it, and I was very happy that you agreed to scale up some 1870s era W irons for me that you had first made in HO. Is upscaling an easy thing to do with a CAD drawing?
It's sort of a mixed bag, I would say. So you could have things like rivets, let's say, depending on the scale that you're working in. You might want to scale them to be a little larger, a little smaller. It depends on the prototype, really. You get a lot of like later cars and engines that will be all just sheet metal on the side, and you got to factor in sort of smaller tolerances, let's say like, abutting plates or something. So you might want to modify that to be more prominent on something like O scale, whereas you would want to eliminate those things in something in N scale. It depends quite greatly depending on the gauge mostly. So.
Hmm. And I'm sure the tolerances for something that was designed to run on a computer sim, there's no real tolerances, or the physics of the game is different than something that has to be created physically with the idea of printing that out and fitting a motor in the boiler or something like that. Um, could you
I would
talk a
actually
little bit
say,
about I'm sorry?
oh, oh no, I'm sorry. I would actually say it's interesting. I look at so with Oyster Bay Railroad Museum, I've realized just how forgiving a lot of these prototypes would be.
Hmm.
You look at some of the welds are interesting to say the least. Like they do repairs and stuff over the years, and I sort of look at it as when you get to sort of the virtual modeling and the 3D printing and CAD design aspect of it, you're really sort of representing, the model or the prototype, as it were, in its sort of purest, I guess, definition. You're matching up with what people's expectations are, and it's an interesting thing. You you get a lot of appreciation looking at some of the equipment.
Right, right. Like, yeah, I was recently just looking at the Texas rebuild, the Western Atlantic Railroad, the Texas, which was one of the locomotives from the locomotive chase, um, and it was a 5-foot gauge engine, and they narrow gauged, or they standard gauged it. So there's big gouges in the frame where they had to uh, kind of squeeze the wheels together and almost rubbing the metal. But I mean, that engine ran for long enough that it made it into preservation. So um, tolerances on the real thing are definitely a little looser than we think they are, I think. Um, but I think that probably when you're designing something um, to work as a model, physical model, um, there the tolerances on an N scale model are probably much greater than they would be for something that would be in an O scale model or a HO even.
All right, I would think so. Yeah, that's typically what I find with a lot of these. Right now, what I'm working on is a model. I have it here of a Long Island caboose N22Bs. This is one of the production models that we're working on, a part of Twin Forks NRHS, one of the other societies that I'm working with. And things like the walls, for instance, if I can disassemble this here, you'll see let's see if we could get this a little closer here. You'll notice the wall thicknesses. They're relatively thin, whereas you would have to bulk them up more on an N scale. And you lose some of that detail when you scale it down as well. Things like the roof, for instance, they'll have these galvanized sheets on the rail ones, and they'll have these. They're pressed. They're sort of they would have a big jig that would compress the shape of these triangular pieces here.
Right.
You lose some of that detail, and that's something that you would have to bulk up when you go to N scale or Z scale or smaller scales. And in the opposite direction, you could go to O scale or S scale. You might want to add a little more detail. You're seeing much more of the model itself, as it would look like on the prototype. So that's just a couple things to consider with making a 3D model. And one of the things that I actually admire about some of the train simulators, so like Nick's working on, you can get to that level of detail that people expect out of a virtual simulator. You can create textures, you can create bump maps, animations, all sorts of things that represent what you want to model a lot better in some cases than you would if you were to do the physical models.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah, I can see that. Yeah, you could. It's probably easier to copy a topographic map or something to get your starting point if you're modeling a prototype in a simulator. You used to offer your models on Shapeways. I think Bar Model Railroads, was that
Bar Model
your call
Productions,
Bar
yeah,
Model Productions?
it was such
Yeah.
it was an interesting time on there. I would create these I had many. I think I had like 200 models at one point that were either in the backlog, or I had like 60 that were available for retail sale. I'm still trying to rebuild my my inventory back up on other sites now. But the site was very good, I would say, for creating unique models, or offering, I should say. There's a shop called Iron Genesis Works that offers early 1830s locomotives
Mm.
and rolling stock. Not something that you can find just anywhere, except maybe if you were to scratch build. My shop, I offered a lot of English prototypes, mostly your route that you modeled, London, Brighton, South Coast. um, you get all sorts of people, different areas of interest, and they were available for quite a while on that site. um, Nowadays I model on 3DP trains and also Oak Hill Works. It's interesting because they're on two separate continents
Right.
where they're based out of. So you have to sort of manage what you want to offer. It's not global like it was with Shapeways.
Right. Have you ever tried to take one of your models that you've modeled for with the idea of printing it out? Have you ever tried to put it into a sim program? Is that
I've
something that
ex-
you're interested in?
I've explored that. I've talked a little bit back and forth with different members of modeling groups. There's a specific one for the game Roblox, where that you have the program's called Blender. So you would create a model inside there, uh, and they would have all of the tools in order to rig it and in order to do texturing and all of that other stuff. I was exploring for one of my very early locomotives. I have a Baldwin, uh, and I was looking at maybe getting that into a sort of game. You can import them. They utilize similar, I would say, tool palettes as it would in AutoCAD. It wasn't too fruitful. It seemed a little involved, but with my skill set, that is, it's something that could be done. Um, just not something that I've really looked at too heavily.
Fair enough. Fair. That's it seems like a challenge. Nick, I wanted to congratulate you on 10 years of your podcast, The Roundhouse. I first heard you there because I have a lot of time at work where I can listen to podcasts. I'm working with my hands in a brass shop, and I have headphones on, so I might as well be doing something. So I do listen to a lot of podcasts at work. Um, I was surprised later that you had a YouTube channel where you recreate layouts. Uh, how long have you been doing that, and how has that evolved?
Well, to provide a timeline of my experience with train sims and how I then got into podcasting and then back into train sims, you could say. I started with Microsoft Train Simulator all the way back in 2001. I was about 10 at the time. And Microsoft Train Simulator was one of the tools that transitioned me from just being a rail fan, because it was something that I did to connect with my dad, into something that had meaning to me for my own sake and my own pursuits. And I credit a couple of very well done routes that were created for that platform. One being the London and Port Stanley, which is an interurban, or was an interurban railroad in southern Ontario, and another being the Fonda, Johnstown, and Gloversville Railroad, which was a short line in upstate New York. Those were both add-ons that made me really think about this connection with the history. And so that led me to creating a YouTube series called At the Rail Yard in 2008, where I started reviewing these products, and not just reviewing them from a standpoint of, is this good? Is this bad? How do the graphics look? How well does it work? But also from a mindset of, what's the story behind this? What's the history behind this? So that we're establishing what it should be replicating, and then using that as a framework. So it was through that lens of storytelling and thinking about trains in history that in 2015 led me to say, there's all these stories that exist in railroading and model railroading and all of its niches. Let's tell some of them. Let's get the people behind them, and let's feature that. And so I embarked on the podcast, which, thank you, I've enjoyed doing over the past 10 years, and talked to some amazing people. And it's a constant reminder to me of how varied the field is. Just the range of people that one can talk to, not just in terms of who have a direct interest or a career in railroading either, but folks for whom they come at it from a different angle. I once interviewed a board game designer who created a board game based on the Snowdon Mountain Railway, a cog railway in Wales, as one of many examples on that. So that's led me to realizing that where for some folks, there's always going to be kind of particular favorite railroads or particular favorite research points. And that's their field, and that's what they know. For me, I've always been kind of nomadic. I have my favorite railroads, but some of them are liable to change from month to month, because I learned so much. And so through this, I've been train simming throughout, but it was this idea of, what's another way of exploring these histories? What's another way of kind of getting a taste of these different railroads, that led to 3 years. Yes, man, time flies. 3 years ago, I started live streaming Great Train Layouts Live, where each month what we're doing is taking a track plan and starting with the base bones of it, and the end result being a completed layout. So I mentioned earlier what the starting process is. So hopefully you can see it on the screen now. This is where I have taken a two-dimensional track plan. In this case, it's from an old model railroader, the Harmony, Butler, and Newcastle Electric Railway. So it's an interurban. And I've laid all the track, and you can kind of see in the center, well, the kind of the middle of where the short and the long legs of the L join, there's this elevated track where there's going to be a bridge that crosses over those lower three lines. So I've placed all the track, and I've added the grades. And then here's a screenshot from a little bit later, where now I've started to add the buildings. And the layout like this is going to take a little longer, but the layouts that I live stream, we're spending 2 hours taking maybe a 3x6 foot layout, placing all the track and building up the scenery. And then that last hour is spent play testing it in the sim environment. This is another one that I built last year. It's based on a track plan by Bernard Kempinski, who folks probably know from his amazing O-scale layout, the Aquia line. This was in a 45 track plans you could build layout. And To Javier's point about the different routes you could take with a 3D model, this is the Glenbrook, which is a steam locomotive, narrow gauge steam engine that still survives out in California. And the artist behind this is a guy by the name of Dan Gollery, who does amazing work. And he's built up a team of people on a website known as Trainsforge that are just these amazing artists that what they do is they use programs like Blender to create these models, which have obviously animated running gear. The doors might open. You might even be able to open the lens on that headlight so that somebody can clean the lamp. Details like that. And these train sims are, I should stress, community endeavors, because even where I'm the person in this case building this train layout, if you will, it's somebody has made the track asset that I'm using to build. Somebody's made the turntable. Somebody else has made those buildings that you see. Somebody's made that tree backdrop. And all of these train sims have really wonderful communities behind them that a lot of their work is released free to these communities. And the result being that it's this wonderful melting pot of ideas and railroads and modeling styles that then you as the end user can put together as you see fit.
We have a few questions in the chat. If I think now's a good enough time to try. How do you think the NMRA can capitalize on these simulators to inspire younger and space-limited modelers? Simulation or CAD? It's a very general question, but what was the learning curve of the software that you use for developing your simulations or your CAD drawings?
So to answer the first question of how the NMRA capitalizing on it, I think I know at times historically there's been fears among some of that train simulators are part of this movement towards electronics that are going to take my generation and younger away from model railroading into their computers even more. But it's just a different relationship. And I say that as somebody who has not one, but two separate railroads that I'm building in my office. And I think that the advantage of trying to find what are these meeting points, whether it be things like the work that Javi is doing with using 3D modeling to augment his and other people's model railroading, is that it's just more people, is that there's this wealth of artists and historians that really specialize in this field. And some of them you might make model railroaders out of, some of them you might not, but it still leads to a larger community. It leads to interesting conversations about what these platforms are capable of, and exchanging of ideas is always a good thing.
I have a specific question for Javier, and it is, what is the name of Javier's business again?
That's BARM models, BARM models, and that would be available via 3DP trains, as I stated, and
3DP.
also OKIL works for any of my UK enthusiasts.
And are you an HO scale modeler as well as a virtual modeler? Like,
I am
I remember
not.
when
I am
when I
not,
met you,
but
you
I
had,
do
yeah.
indulge in some of the virtual ones. There's a really good virtual layout. I can't remember the name. Anne's layout, something like that. It's a modeler, I think in Wales, who is unable to model, sort of physical modeling, and they take that virtual space and they're able to enjoy the hobby, the same as you and I are, without having the physical assets in front of them. So it really is, it's something that anybody could enjoy, if they were after it.
Another question. We had a young visitor at the museum last year who took close-ups of many of our 1909 railroad cars to be used as skins for simulated cars. Can either of you explain this process?
That could mean any multitude of things, because everybody's approach to your question about kind of the learning curve, each platform is different and everybody's approach to that platform is different. But in a broad, as not technical as I could be, the idea of a skin is just when you have a 3D model, doesn't matter the platform. If you have a 3D model, you have the data of what is the shape of that, sometimes referred to as the mesh. And that's just, if you were to go on to Shapeways, for example, and you're looking at a file, that is a mesh, essentially, because there's no paint, there's no color, that is just the shape. And then when it comes to train simulation and you have texturing, so I just use the word texturing. That's what I'm used to calling it. But they're also called skins. Sometimes if somebody's taking a pre-existing model and changing the railroad on it, that's called reskinning. So in the case of somebody getting photos of your car, they might be taking photos just because then they're going to use that as reference material for their project. They could also be taking photos that then they'll use to, so if you have side panels on it, for example, then maybe their intention is to turn those photos, crop them, and use them on the model.
If someone was to just be looking to start this process, what would a recommendation of a site to go or a program to learn be?
From a train sim process, the place to start is YouTube and just see what train simulators interest you. There's reviews out there, but you can also see some of the third-party content, which is to say material made by people that aren't the developers of the platform itself. And you can see what is available for each of those platforms. And a shameless plug for myself would be if you go to atherailyard.com, you could see the video reviews that I've created over the years that are examples of content for largely Microsoft Train Simulator and Open Rails. But you start with YouTube, you see what interests you, and then I would get comfortable in a sim environment. And using that, and then maybe you start to want to use its layout editing tools to create your own routes and so forth. But you'll find that pretty much any platform you go into, there's going to be a community that could support it. For example, there's a great website called trainsim.com that is a tremendous resource of a forum that that discusses a multitude of platforms. You could go there, you can search topics, you can post questions. And then, on the 3D modeling side, I'm sure Javi could speak more to this. But he mentioned Blender, and I would back that up. Blender is a great 3D modeling program, and you can find tutorials on YouTube that get you up and running with basic how you create a shape, how do you create a donut, etc.
I would back that
Sad,
up. Yeah, Blender
yeah,
is it's a great resource, especially if you want to get into other areas. I think there's tools in there in order to even make film, clips and stuff like that. It's all sort of baked into one program, and there's a lot of different add-ons that you can add to Blender in order to make it even better.
yeah. I'm really sad. Sorry that I couldn't get. I had technical issues and couldn't get your images up, Javier. But you use the drawing, like the prototype drawing, and use that as a plane to build your model around. So it's actually sized exactly to to your prototype, which is a cool way of working, and it's neat to see a brand new fully rendered um, engine based around a drawing that could be over 100 years old. It's a neat process, and I'm sorry that I couldn't share that image. Um, let's see, are there any active group that you can join to operate on a sim? Is that,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Tons. And that's the type of thing that um, there's public groups that are out there. So I know, for example, if you went into the Run 8 platform, which focuses on modern railroading, and you Google search that, you'll find the website where you can buy the game and run it yourself. But there's other websites I know that are out there that advertise operating sessions that they host. Um, that said, it's the kind of thing that if you and if you get, say, Railroader, which is the recent release that involves transition railroading, that's you buy that and download that from the platform called Steam, and Steam has forums, and it also has a Discord. So those are communities that you can uh, become part of, and people advertise operating sessions through that, and then it's one of these things where, just like model railroading, the more you get into it, the deeper the community goes and the more connections you make.
Okay. And let's see, another question is, Can could you use these operating sims as part of your AP chief dispatcher? I don't know if you know what that is as part of the AP program of the NMRA.
Hmm.
I don't know if that's a question that either of you could answer if you're trying.
I am not near the modeler to be pursuing an MMR, sadly, but I would say that it's an interesting question for whatever committee does oversee that. And I think that if it's something that you wanted to pursue, there's absolutely a case to be made for the legitimacy of dispatching a session in any of these platforms, because they are still very intense. Depending on how many trains you're running, of course, but they can still require a lot of on the fly thinking, effective communication. So the skills that I've employed when running model railroad operating sessions very much cross over into the train sim realm. So if it's something you'd like to see, I think you should absolutely advocate for it to those on that, whatever committee oversees that, because I think it's something that, from my completely biased opinion, should qualify. But I am not authorized to say that it does.
Well, it seems like more and more people are learning these programs every day, and maybe it's the path of the future. Um, and that's part of why I was interested in getting this roundtable going. And I thank you both for participating. It's very helpful. Um, let's see, I think we have 2 more minutes, and um, so I can take another question. Can you use a railroad simulator as a track planning program that also allows you to test how things run?
Absolutely. And that's where, so the platform, as I mentioned earlier, that I use on my monthly live streams, which you can see the upcoming ones as well as the replays at greattrainlayouts.com. The platform I use is Trains, spelled with a Z, 19. And it is something where I typically am importing a plan from AnyRail or that somebody's done a scale drawing of into the game, because the game does allow you to do things that would not be physically possible in real life, like running Big Boy around an HO scale 11-inch radius curve. the game has no issue with that. So you would want to make sure that you're using something to base your measurements off of from a, will this equipment actually navigate this curve or have enough clearance between tracks, for example. But once you've established that, then you could absolutely bring it into a platform like TrainZ. And if you're comfortable enough, you can probably even design something native in the environment itself. It's just be mindful of things like that. But yes, I am such a strong advocate for play testing there. I do commissions for people who want to have their track plans play tested, like built and play tested, because it could tell you so much, especially how operations work. But just, is this going to satisfy me for months and months, or am I going to get tired of this and decide, no, it needs a little bit more variety, or I want to go in a different direction? And those are things that you learn through play testing in a sim like Trains.
Very cool. Let's see. I think we covered we covered every question. Is there anything you would like to add to the conversation, or anything we missed that you think is critical that we touch on?
Yeah, I would just like to add to what Nick was talking about earlier with the question on APs. I think that I think that virtual sim railroading definitely deserves a closer look at consideration for that stuff. You have so many hours, so many people. You're talking about community assets and stuff like that. People just pouring their hearts into these railroading simulations that they want them to be as close as possible to the real thing. And you can even get further than you would typically with normal model railroading in like HO scale or in scratch building or whatever it might be. You can even get to the point where you have like cabs, functional equipment inside the cabs and stuff, and you're just sort of frame yourself sitting inside one of those engines. It's a really wonderful resource, and it goes beyond, I think, the need for consideration.
Very cool. Very cool. Oh, well, again, thank you both so much, and I think this was a successful roundtable, and a little different than other physical model railroading, but an area of growth and interest. So thank you again.
It
Thank
was
you.
my
If
pleasure.
folks have any questions, they can reach out to me at greattrainlayouts.com. I'd be happy to steer people in the right direction, sort of a travel guide for virtual rail fanning, if you will.
Perfect. Welcome back to the NERx, and we have a special treat tonight, a layout tour of the New Haven Railroad by Ed O'Rourke, MMR, and I'd like to welcome Ed O'Rourke, the president of the NER.
Thank you, Andy. This is a new layout, so you're going to see it in progress. We moved into this house in June of 2023, so we're coming up on 2 years. So you're going to see it. It's an in-progress layout. You're going to see some plywood, Pacific, to all the way to scenery. So Speed, go ahead and roll the tape. Hello, I'm Ed O'Rourke. Welcome to my New Haven Railroad. In last year's NERx, you saw my old layout, which has been torn down, and we've moved to a new space. These things happen. And I was blessed to find this space where I can have a more up-to-date and better New Haven than I had in the old layout. There's more room. There's easier access. And I'm going to apply a number of things that I've learned from that old layout to this one, or I am in the process of applying those things. One of them is that we no longer have a 10% grade from the staging into the main part of the layout. That was a compromise. There are no duck unders, and there's plenty of room in the aisles for people to walk around and operate. So those were some of the main drivers to make this a better experience when I have folks in to run, and just for me personally. You will note that the bench work is at desktop height. I've learned from that. I had a friend who ended up in a wheelchair, and since this is hopefully the last place that I will live before my daughters put us in a home, I'm planning on having this so that I can work on it sitting in a wheelchair if need be, or at least just if I'm not able to stand for long periods. The corollary is it also makes it very grandchild friendly, because my grandkids are only about this height, and in the old layout they had to sit on a stool if they wanted to operate. Here they can walk around and they can run trains. It's very handy. Okay, so we're going to show you how a typical operation session works here. We have in the staging yard, which represents New York City, Washington, D.C., and the New Haven's Maybrook yard in the Hudson Valley. We have staged there a train called the Senator, which is actually an interline train with the Pensy that ran from Washington to Boston. On the head end of it is a New Haven EP5, which is a Rapido locomotive. It's going to pull the train into New Haven. When it arrives in New Haven, we'll cut the EP5 off and send it into the motor storage area. We will put on the front of it an I-4 Pacific, which is a Broadway product. That will haul it into Boston, which is the other staging yard on the other end of the layout. And that's kind of how we do this. This was what I grew up watching as a kid in New Haven. As they took these up, they were diesels when I did it, but I like the steamers. We will also want to do some head end switching there, so we will pull Off the back of it, we have a grill car, which we will take off in New Haven, and that will go into the coach yard. So let's begin. We have taken the electric off here in New Haven. We've put the steam engine on, and now the passenger train is ready to move on to Boston, where it will finish its run. The electric will run down through the station and over into motor storage. This is the part of the layout where an awful lot goes on, because this is the part that I remember as a boy sitting over here underneath this bridge in our 1957 Chevy with my father, watching them do this. They weren't steam then, of course. They were diesels, and we do some diesels as well. Once I'm satisfied with this, getting the base scenery in, and I'm positive that the track work is the way it's going to go, we'll install catenary over all of this. New Haven was a much bigger station. This is certainly a representation, but they did this in 10 minutes, the work that we did, so that they had a 4-hour trip from New York City to Boston, which is about what the Acela does today, I think. And they don't have to change in New Haven. But they took those off, they did all the head-end switching, and off they went on a 10-minute headway here. And woe betide he who held up some of this. We have about, on this layout, we have about 10 trains that run through here. There's a station master who controls that process, sets the switches, and determines where the trains come and go. Eventually we will do that with a fast clock. I haven't got the fast clock yet, just to kind of time things out a little bit. In addition, there are 2 operators. There's one who runs the electric and one who runs the steam engine, so that they work together with the station master to facilitate that. In addition to that, we have a small switching area over here where we pick up some freight and some express cars. That's done by a freight that runs out of the staging over here. It does some other switching over there and then comes in and picks this up. That also has to coordinate with the station master, so you have to work within all of that. There's the steam switcher, there's another switcher, a diesel switcher over at the other end. So that's what we do here. There's also an MU sitting in the back here that you can see. That's going to head down to New York as an all stops local here as well. It's the multiple unit. The New Haven had a whole bunch of these veterans. They ran in commuter service into New York. The power is actually in the front car, even though that's prototypically a trailer, unpowered control trailer. The power was in the coach in the back. The power car is a kit bash from a Bachmann Doodlebug, and the coach is an Athearn coach that I modified to put the pantographs on. So this is the local switcher. It's done all of its switching over here, and so now it's going to head over into the station and make another complication for the station agent, station master. He's going to have to get him down into the switching area here, because he's got to service the coal tower and the gas company over there. These are all done by switch lists. We might point out that the backdrops, the photo backdrops, are all from Lark products. And most of the structures were things that I was able to salvage from my previous layout. Some of them had to be repurposed or reworked a bit to get them to fit in here. The next train we're going to run is a train on the branch line. It's going to run up the canal line, which was built on the bed of the Farmington Canal through New Haven and up actually to Holyoke, Massachusetts. We represent Holyoke with staging. And these are a couple of RS1s. No, I'm sorry, RS2s that will take that train. He's going to come over, pick up his train in the staging yard. These are both Atlas units. Or are they? They might be proto units. On the canal line, we have, just to make things exciting, we have an RDC that comes down, makes a couple of station stops, and it's going to meet the branch line train in Farmington. This is Plainville, Connecticut, which was a junction with the New Haven Highland line, which you can see sort of represented here. The rail bus was a Mack transit bus that they put on wheels. The administration of the railroad changed. They didn't like that, so that was the only one of the 10 that ever really ran on the New Haven. And they discovered that they weren't heavy enough to set off the relays for the signals or the crossing gates, so they had a very short life. But I had to have one when I found it in a brass sale. It may run back and forth out of there. We'll see. And most of them some of them ended up as Sperry rail grinders. Others of them were shipped overseas. But of all the 10 they bought, they only ran one on the New Haven. We don't always time this perfectly, but sometimes the RDC has to wait a little while. All the switches up here are hand thrown. And the local, once he gets past the switch there, will wait until the RDC departs, and then he'll have some local switching to do up here, and some of it he does on the way up, some of it he does on the way down, depending on how the operator feels about it. the RDC makes one more stop in Cheshire, Connecticut, over here, which is all just kind of roughed in. And then he heads down, and well, his next stop will be in New Haven, and then he will depart south, finishing his run in Bridgeport, Connecticut, which is in staging. This is the manufacturer's railroad, which was something operated by the New Haven, originally ran with trolley motors, but after the trolley lines were done, they used the GE 44 tonners on this. This is a Rapido 44 tonner. And this layout is based on the John Armstrong book, 6 model railroad, HO model railroads you can build. Custom line, was published by Atlas. And this was my father's layout when I was a kid growing up. I had to modify it a bit because there would be a turntable over here on the left, which I didn't want to use. So I had to set up a different means of getting a runaround track, which took some figuring out and thinking about. So I modified the plan a bit to do that. And there is a connection over right just to the left of where the switcher is right now that runs over to the main line of the railroad. So the operation here is that the operator comes in, he does his local switching here, pushes the cars out there, gets the new train, and then brings them in and spreads them around. And we found that basically somebody comes over here, runs this, and we never see them again until we're ready to go home, because it's quite involved and takes a lot of thought. This was the first section that I completed on the layout. I was still waiting for them to finish the room over here, because I had somebody come and do that for me. But I like to have something finished so I can show it to people. This is what it'll look like when it's all done. So that's kind of what we have here. And if I cut the section where it connects to the main layout, where it runs through the wall, I can take this, it's all a standalone, so I can take this with me when the girls put me in the home and set it up in my living room, so I still have some trains to run, even when I'm 95 or something.
I don't know how many of you are into scenery, and I would like to offer a suggestion. If you notice here on the Agway building, the foundation doesn't lay flat on the ground, on the board, okay? Now, to alleviate that, I'm going to add a piece of foam core that I got at Michael's, and I'll paint it with a base color like I did mine, and then I'll add a building to it. In this case, it's going to be Allard Equipment Company. Alrighty. And that'll bring it up to the level of our track. And now on the loading dock, I had to add more than just a foam core. I added a piece of heavy cardboard, and that brought the level of the dock right up to the level of my flat car. And that way I can unload equipment for Allard Equipment. This is just a tip that I'd I've come across and something I've been doing on my railroad. And one additional tip I might add, ground is usually not really flat. It has a lot of texture to it. And one of the things that I've done, I got several years ago, I got a supply of crushed walnut shells. A crushed walnut shell is something that you can find at a pet store, and by laying down a layer of the crushed walnut shell, I get a texture in my ground that I'm very pleased with. And onto that, I add bushes and sticks and whatnot. You'll also notice in this particular shot something that looks like very small sticks and debris on what would normally be a forest floor. Those small sticks are actually crushed pine needles. I use that everywhere that I've got a forest or a variety of bushes and trees. Just a few thoughts on scenery for all of those who are trying to spruce up their railroad.
Welcome back. Thanks for the tip. And we're back with Peter Bach, who's with a clinic called Making Foam Cradles for Transporting Models. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you. So without much introduction, I'd like to invite you to watch this video that I made a couple days ago. And if you have any questions, you can also write me, and I'll leave my email at the end of the session. So without further ado, please, let's watch the video. This is my presentation of foam inserts for model railroad. My name is Peter Bach. I'm part of the Hudson Valley Division. This is my NMRA number. And this is the product that I want to show you how to make for yourself. You've got cars that need foam inserts, I'm sure, otherwise you wouldn't be here. So the problem is that you have scratch-built models that never come with their own inserts, or you bought something on eBay or otherwise, and you're stuck transporting them in tissue paper or bubble wrap, or you just put them loosely in a blue box, which is kind of sort of okay, but does lead to damaged cars occasionally. Especially those scratch-built cars will be delicate. And here is a public service announcement for everybody. And I put that in, and I put several others in just to loosen up this talk, make it a little bit more interesting, keep you from falling asleep tonight. And it's also a sign that I don't take myself too seriously. So please take this with a grain of salt and understand that it's meant in the most humorous way. So again, the problem is the car is falling around. This is my buddy. He's been making reefers for I don't know how long, and there's room for them to bounce around, as you can see here, and break off pieces. And so they did. And remember, the repair of a repair is never as good as the original. So you're going to have stuff like this because it was already repaired. Here, this from an outside brace, woodside car, and one of the braces broke off, which has to be glued back on, and sometimes you can see the rest of the glue. If you paint it, then you have to mask these walks. It's hard to do. You can do it; it can be done, but you really should try not to have them damaged. So there are different types of foam. Classically, and the thing that everybody thinks of is styrofoam. That's those little kernels that are stuck together and form a board, a box, something to put your stuff in, something that's used to insulate when you're bringing frozens home. That's this stuff here, but it's not the only type of foam. There are rubber-based foams, and that's this here. That could be a rubber-based foam. There's no vinyl foam pictured, but this is currently my favorite. You can cut it on many different things, and it comes out nice. It is very easy to manipulate, and the actual product that I'm recommending here today. Then you've got the polyurethane foam, which can be expanding, maximally expanding, or less than maximally expanding, but still it expands. It can be expanded and then cut. There are several ways that you can do this. I would just be careful because if it expands into the model or it expands to the model, it might break or crack something. So not my first choice. You have to be careful how you use it, but you can. Both this and the polyurethane down here, which is like a seat cushion foam, does decay in the presence of heat and moisture. So that stuff won't live forever. You make it for a while and maybe you get 10 years out of it, which is reasonable. But just be aware it's a not forever product. And then finally, I want to talk about neoprene. Neoprene suits are here, and they are used for diving, but you can also buy them as flat stock and cut them, manipulate them that way with a pair of scissors. Usually they're like a 1/4 inch or 3/8 or 1/2 inch thick. I haven't seen neoprene that's any thicker, but maybe it's out there. And when you do the spray foam thing, read the label, see if it says maximally expanding, and stay away from that. Stay away from the maximally expanding stuff. You can buy foam. You can buy foam at many sources. This is usually my go-to place, McMaster Carr. I buy tools here. I buy stock here, metals, rods, sheet metal. I can also buy foam here. And they're actually really good. They take great care to get it to you in excellent shape, but they are expensive. So be careful with them. Look at the prices. But one thing that they are valuable for, and this won't cost you a dime, is reading up on the details of the different types of foam. You've got the foam description, and then or the name of the foam, and then you've got the description here. There are more options. You can categorize the foam as open cell, closed cell, smooth surface, neoprene adhesive backed. The open cell collapses faster, it tends to be softer. It will absorb a liquid. Basically, this is a sponge. Then you've got the closed cell. Chemicals and oils don't travel in it as nicely and as easily, but they will still travel on the surface across the model. And if those oils aren't suitable for the whole model, if those cleaners aren't suitable for the whole model, you will get some damage, and you have to be aware of that. One way to avoid it is to wipe as much of those chemicals off before you put it in storage, which makes sense anyway, but just in case. The smooth surface is the type of foam where the chemicals travel the least, but not always an option. And the neoprene has an adhesive back, so you can stack them. Maybe you can just get 3/8, but if you make 4 of them, you've got 3/4 of an inch. Stack them on top of each other, cut them with scissors, and that works quite well. Then there are other factors to consider. You've got your firmness and how affected by chemicals are they. So the firmness can be measured, and I'll show you how that's measured later. You have a reactivity to foam. Styrofoam tends to be inert to most cleaners that are water-based. Anything that's solvent-based, the styrofoam will disintegrate in the presence of. Neoprene is even better with solvents, but will eventually decay in the presence of solvents or oils. So there's no good solution out here. You just have to. It's just a compromise, and you have to be fastidious to clean off all your additives and chemicals off of your models. We have to do that anyway. Who knows if the print comes off? Who knows if the decals are well made? So just don't take the risk. Then there's the firmness. The firmness is measured is actually a measure of how much you can compress it, or well, you know what firmness is, but it's defined as the indentation load deflection. And the ILD rating is calculated by pressing a circular disc into a foam block until it's compressed by 25% of its original thickness. The rate required to compress the foam is then used to determine its IDL, or its rating. So let's say it takes 5 pounds, then the IDL rating is 5. The higher the IDL rating, the firmer the foam. Chemicals. You've got cleaners, soaps, waxes, like some smoke fluid, and I'm not sure if that's a cleaner, but some people use it for cleaning. Isopropyl alcohol, excuse me. And they've got those lubricants that I was talking about, the oils and greases. They will contaminate your model. They'll definitely decay your foam, or at least most foams. And just be aware of that and careful. So now that we've got the foam classifications out of the way, let's take first steps of making a foam insert. You have to start by making a stencil. Start with the dimensions of the box, put it down on a piece of paper, push it to the edge, and put down an outline. Then take that outline, center your model in it, and just draw around your model with a pencil. Try to keep the pencil perpendicular so that it's not skewed, and you have to manipulate the stencil further. One of the most difficult parts about a stencil of a model railroad car is the KD coupler, because that can be manipulated quite a bit up and down. You can push it down, you can push it up, forward, side to side. You know what they're like. So just be aware of them and try not to manipulate them too much. You also have other details that you have to be careful of and aware of. Things like this brake wheel that's sticking out the side. You do need to take compensation for that. And I've cut it out here already so that it will not cause problems with a foam insert. Here I have the first test. I laid it down. What I wanted to do is basically fall around the model, and it's not quite. It gets stuck here, and it's stuck here, and then it's also stuck here, and it's especially stuck here. So those things need to be recut with your scissors, and that's easy. You can either make a drawing or you can just memorize where it needs to go, and just keep putting this thing on your model and letting it loosely fall down. Here's the roof walk that's catching, and so that's another problem that you have to be aware of. Now I've got it to the point where it will fall down over the coupler, it will fall down over the wheels, and this is where I want to be. So what foam to use? Let's dive right in. The first foam that comes to mind is styrofoam. It is the ubiquitous foam. It's been used for years for shipping stuff. If you've received stuff in styrofoam, you know it will break. That's not really a big risk with models, but it is something to be aware of. Using the outline, trace it to an 1.5 inch thick slab of styrofoam. Cut out the trace with a foam cutter using an 1 inch thick piece that you cut for the bottom, put it in the bottom. You can glue them together, but I don't see the need. They will stay together in the blue box as long as the model's in there and you're not inverting it. You don't need it to be glued together. Alternately, instead of an 1.5 inch piece, you can take 2 3/4 inch pieces and cut the second one identical, but additionally put the cut out finger spaces so that you can grab the model. The foam cutter I use is a hot wire foam cutter by Hot Wire Foam Factory. This thing is actually really good. It comes with a fence, so you can cut things here. You can use it for your layout. You can use it for landscape. I make foam ramps with it. Down here you see a picture of a woodland scenic foam ramp. I take the original foam ramp that I've purchased and I put an equally thick piece of styrofoam up against it, and I cut from this end here. I cut in this direction along the model. Obviously it's not curved, it's flat and straight. And so what I get is one piece that's a wedge like this, and I put another piece on top of it like this, and then I cut here with the Hot Wire Foam Factory, and I get this wedge here, or this wedge here. And it has the identical ramp of this original, sorry. And that works very well. You just have to put interlaced cuts. You can't forget those to allow the ramp to move around a curve, or etc. You can also use this thing around the house. My wife uses it to cut pieces of styrofoam so she can put them in the garbage. Obviously, you can use it for this purpose. What it doesn't do is it doesn't cut polyurethane well. The seat cushion foam that I'm going to be advocating doesn't work very well. So that's not something that you should consider. You can make your own styrofoam. One of the things that you need is a mold. You cast a positive with gypsum. Using gypsum, you make an imprint from the car by covering the car with saran wrap, and then you press it into a tray half full of gypsum slurry, let it harden and take it out, and that's your positive. What I didn't write here is that once you've taken it out and you've removed all the saran wrap, you still need to file it down, smooth it out, make it something that you can cast a negative to. So you cast your positive, and then you cast your negative from that, which you will then use to make your styrofoam mold. Sanding the edges of your positive is really important. You can even use mold release. Oops, sorry. You can even use mold release, and obviously the saran wrap to separate your negative from your positive. Take your negative and then put it in an Athern blue box, again with saran wrap. Put your styrofoam pearls in and heat it under pressure and moisture, and fuse the fuse the styrofoam kernels together. So new styrofoam is made in 3 steps. There's the pre-expanding, which is explained here. You have beads. You expand them with pentane gas, which is a hydrocarbon and is quite dangerous. I would not advocate that you try pre-expanding. Even if you want to save that money, don't. You've got your mold. You put your pellets or your pearls into the mold, and then you do a final expansion with steam and heat and pressure, and that will then yield your foam insert. It works actually quite well, but it's a mess. So just be forewarned, this is probably not your first choice in making them. The downside of styrofoam is, number one, the mess. It's very sticky when it's setting up, but you also get these flakes that are static, which my wife hates. When she hears that I'm going to make something with styrofoam, she eyes me very carefully and makes sure that I remember how much mess it is, even though she never has to clean. Well, no, that's not true. In the beginning, she had to clean it up, and I heard about it. It's still lots of work, and the styrofoam that you cast in the method that I described just a second ago can have some hard surfaces, and these can break off fine details. So just be careful. Upsetting my wife is a high priority for me because I have the same situation as this guy. He says, I swear my wife wants to kill me some days, but she's also my emergency contact. I just hope they don't call her on, I just hope they call her on a good day. Yeah. Well, we'll see. So you could make a sandwich, meaning you cut out your styrofoam outline as you've made it on paper, and you transfer it onto styrofoam. You cut it with a hot wire, and then you can lay it down on a piece of styrofoam that you put in the bottom of the box. You can glue them together, but I don't recommend that. You're already done at that point, and you're not restricted to one material. You can use the styrofoam for the sides, and then something for the bottom, maybe some polyurethane that's really soft, or something else that would be suitable. And you can glue those together, and I'll show you how in a moment. So this is my styrofoam bottom that I made from some styrofoam that I have that I had laying around. It was 3/8 of an inch, and it's probably too thick. You don't need 3/8 in a model like this. This is not quite 1.5 inches. This is more like 1 3/4 right here, and that's what the what your insert should be. It should be flush with the edge of the box. So here I am cutting out along the fence of my hot foam glue cutter, hot wire foam cutter. Sorry, hot wire foam cutter. And you can then get yourself a nice piece, a square piece that looks really great inside your box, like this. You make yourself a hole to stick the wire through. Again, you've got the static stuff here that is famously annoying. And yeah, see? It sticks to everything, and no matter how much I try to clean, there's still some left over. You cut it out along here, and then you don't try not to answer the phone while you're working. But if you do, no big deal. You can it still will be fine. Maybe it won't be perfect, but for what we're doing here, you don't need perfect. Your models will be sufficiently protected. So here we are. Here's our insert, and it's a little bit more shallow than the box, so I put these spacers in here. You can then fill this space with something soft that won't attach to the model, like cottonwood or something else, maybe a rag or some thin piece of polyethylene foam. That works quite well. So here we are. We've got it finished. There's my little oops, but as you can see, it's no big deal. It works just fine. And this model doesn't have couplers yet, so I have these cutouts in place for the coupler here and here, and I just place the trucks in. They're not screwed down to the model yet. The model is still in a phase in which it is going to be finished. So now we get to my favorite type of foam. Excuse me, polyethylene foam. It's not rubber-based. PE foam or polyethylene comes as low density PE foam or large cell PE foam, or new, and I've never had in my hands, neoprene polyethylene foam. Polyethylene foam is made out of thin sheets that are more or less with heat fused together. They can be separated sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes they don't stick together well, and you can take these blocks apart and cut them individually. Why is polyethylene foam good? It is crack resistant. Unlike styrofoam, if you bend styrofoam too much, it will crack on you. Then you've got the flexibility and endurance at both low and moderate temperatures. It doesn't crack like styrofoam, as I just explained. I want to point out that I said this in this respect because you can heat it enough to melt it. It'll take some higher temperatures, no ambient temperatures that we have to expect where the models are, but you do have to be aware of it. It can be easily shaped by a hot wire foam cutter, as well as the rubber foam cutting tool that I will introduce in a moment. It's resilient. It can be compressed and it comes back to its original size. Some have a high transparency. Don't know why you would want that, but most of the ones that I've seen are either black, white, red. Good stuff. And it has an excellent heel and seal strength, so if it is cut or somehow torn, it will go back to its normal size, and sometimes the tears will be not as evident. You can actually glue these with the Uhu Pour that I just demonstrated and I just showed you. And by the way, Uhu Pour can be bought on Amazon, so that's a good source for them. Pour, P-O-R is the name. This is an insert of the polyethylene with my hot wire glue cutter here in the hot wire foam cutter here in the back. And that's me cutting into this foam. The wire is right here, but is out of focus, so it's hard to see with a black background. This is a red fine Sharpie that I use to draw on it. And when I'm done, you hardly see the red Sharpie, so it should be fine. But you can also eliminate this red draw ink with some isopropyl alcohol. Here I'm holding it at a 45-degree angle to demonstrate how to cut out finger cutouts. You don't really need it on this specific model, but it gives you an idea of how to do it, and it's something that you might need in the future. So this is what it looks like. You've got some room up here to grab the model. You've got some room down here to grab the model, or you can grab it here. And it comes out nicely. Nothing breaks off. I've been taking this specific model in and out of its foam the last few days several times. Then there is the polyurethane foam. Let's call it seat cushion foam for clarity. It's used by upholsterers all over. It doesn't last forever. It actually has its problems in especially hot weather, hot moist weather. Florida is not its friend, but it will work, and you don't need these inserts forever. They'll last long. They'll last long enough. I would go to my favorite upholsterer and ask for a bag full, or raid their trash bin and maybe throw them a 20 or something. Be aware that this foam is actually put into bales and sold, so the offcuts that they have left over, they will sell, and somebody comes pick them up and then renders them, cuts them into foam pieces and sticks them back together again and makes the foam padding for under carpets, or they grind them up and turn them into model railroaders ground foam once they've been dyed the color that they're supposed to be. And which ones you should use is the stuff, not the stuff that's so terribly thin. That is going to be a lot of trouble, and you wind up using a lot of glue to stick them together. I would use, oh, by the way, the pool industry makes spray foam, a spray adhesive that you can spray on these sheets and stick them together. So don't use the stuff out of the tube. If it's good enough for a butt, it's good enough for a locomotive, is what I say. So why use polyurethane if it has a relatively short life of 10 or 20 years? It's cheap, it's soft, it's fault tolerant. If you cut it too large, you can still squeeze it in your blue box. You can still put the model in, you can pull it aside a little bit. It works quite nicely. As I've stated 3 times now, polyurethane doesn't like it hot. The chemical composition of the polyurethane backbone affects its temperature tolerance. So TDI-backed polyurethanes tend to have a higher operating temperature than MDI-backed polyurethanes. When I'm talking about backed here, that means the structure of the material surrounding the bubbles of the foam. Cross-linking the chemical increases their thermal stability, and it creates a 3D network, improves the resistance to heat and chemicals, but I don't think there's a polyurethane out there that is perfect. And the type of polyurethane additive used affects its temperature tolerance. All of this is academic because chances are you will not find out what type of additives they have. You're diving into a garbage bin or a trash bin or a foam bin, and you will have to take what you get. You can buy pick and pluck, which is kind of sort of okay. Notice here that it doesn't fit the thing very well that you're putting into it, and they have egg crate stuck to the top. You're almost always obligated to use their container, or to standardize it around a specific container like a Pelican case or such. So I wrote here, it never fits the box. If you want to use an Athearn blue box, I have not come across the pick and pluck that really works there. It never fits the model either. So it's always a little bit larger, as you see here. And if you keep it from sliding side to side, that'll be fine. I also advocate gluing some cut to fit pieces in. You take either packing peanuts or one of these cubes and cut them with a pair of scissors and glue them in again. It works. Not great, but it's not as much trouble as some of the other things that I'm advocating here. When you want to cut the foam, you use a hacksaw blade. The firmer the foam, the better the hacksaw blade works. Use short strokes, quick strokes. I'm not sure this is really the best. It will look like a piece of wood that you cut on the bandsaw. It's uneven and you can see the cut marks. A little bit better is cutting it with a knife. The best bet is a new ceramic knife. It must be super sharp. I like the ones from Kyocera because their kerf is up here. This part of the knife doesn't wind up being especially thick, and it works quite well. It still will leave a rough cut edge, depending on how much trouble you go to, how straight you can cut, how little you manipulate the foam when you cut it. It'll work either well or very well, but it's not perfect. You can cut with scissors. Don't expect to cut something so super thick as what I advocate for the Athearn Blue Box. Stick to 3/8 of an inch or less. Keep your scissor as straight as you can. The scissor will first compress before it cuts. It will actually shear, and then the cut might be straight or not. But it works. It's not like it's something horrible that you should avoid. The non-plus ultra solution, though, is the foam cutter. This foam cutter has two reciprocating blades in here. They go up and down. They're fairly sharp, but because they do not allow intrusion of skin very deeply, at worst you'll get a scratch. They are new, quite expensive, and thus my saying here, it's not a bank account, it's an official model railroading supply fund. You can buy them used. I bought mine used for $125. Normally they're anywhere from $300 to $600. Bosch makes them, other companies make them. Depends on what you want to spend. So start with an Athearn Blue Box that you have spray painted. I spray paint mine with leftover automotive paint. Once I don't own the car anymore, I will use this paint to spray the Athearn Blue Box. And because I have several blue boxes, I can remember what's in each just based on the color. I might have 3 with this anthracite gray boxes. I might have 2 red ones. I know I have 1 white one. Then I also have something that's a little bit yellow. Whatever paint you have as leftover, you can use. It needs to fit. So you lay it in there and you see if it fits. You need a little space all around. The post office wants 2 inches. I figure 3/4 of an inch here and here and here are sufficient. So lay it out on the foam, make your outline, use your foam cutter, and this is my box of foam remnants. These are pieces of foam that I got from Trader Joe's. They put those in crates around Christmas to transport pears. They prevent the pears from being bruised. I don't know how long they'll live. If they have adequate additives to prevent them from crumbling quickly. You can use your box as a template. I just want to warn you, you could push this area here in too much. So I like making an outline with a Sharpie extra fine and cutting it that way. Here, as you see, not perfectly cut. Some pieces are straight, some pieces aren't. You cannot hurt yourself with this, or well, I guess you could. It's not comfortable, it will hurt, but it's not bad. So this is my base material. I put it in the bottom. This happens to be that 3/8 of foam that I got from Trader Joe's for the pears. You don't need that. You might need it for a locomotive. You don't need it for a boxcar. Those are light enough. So you put the foam in the box, and then you cut it flush right there. Use the box as a template to cut the foam flush. Then you take the foam and fold it over on itself, 180 degrees, and cut into it, making yourself your first hole in the foam insert. That'll allow you to put your machine in. The base of the machine will now, by pulling it and moving it, will now fit in there. And so you cut here, and you start by going there, and you start here, and you make another cut this way. Sorry, not drawn straight, but you get the idea. And that's your first. And you keep on doing that until you get the outline. Here I have a double outline. You'll have to use alcohol to get that away if you want. But I have another method using chalk that I actually like a little better. So there's my foam insert for this model that I've been showing you. It still has the red Sharpie that you need to get rid of with some isopropyl alcohol. And now we come to the chalk method, which is what I'm going to recommend for polyurethane foam inserts, seat cushions. So this is my cutout. It stands a little higher than the box, so I use the box as a template to cut it flush. This is what it looks like here, and this is the piece that was left over. It's about 3/8 of an inch thick. Then I take my chalk and a strainer or sieve or the kitchen. I sneak into the kitchen, I steal it so that my wife doesn't see. And I grate the chalk over the outline and the foam to create something like this here. I then brush it onto the foam, and as I'm doing so, I can brush it into the pores here, and it leaves a better mark. This is what it looks like when I'm done. As you see here, in this area here, it was brushed into the foam pores, and this is what it looks like where it hasn't been brushed in. There we are. I was able to cut it with my foam cutter. Got my insert right here, and I have some chalk remains here. No big deal. Put it under running water, squeeze it out, and I have a finished foam insert. So to sum it up, the two best options are the seat cushion foam that I just demonstrated. Cutting it and outlining it with chalk is my preferred way of doing so. And if you can get it, the polyethylene foam, I think, is a better choice. You'll just have to buy a lot of electronics, a new TV, a new stereo, perhaps a new computer. They all tend to come in this polyethylene foam. So that's another one that I made a long time ago with black outline Sharpie thin, I made it too big, and I made a second outline and cut it out. And here's another public service announcement. Beware of this trap. So, and now the last thing I have is my references, my McMaster car, my links is here, can be reached at www.mcmaster.com. They're really good if just for information. Look them up. Look at the tool prices. They're pricey, but they're worth every penny. And tools and materials can also be had at Micromark. I don't think they have foam, but you can get a lot of other things at micromark.com. And here's a discount code for me that I can pass on. Just put in Great Trains 10 and it'll give you 10%. So thank you very much. I hope I haven't bored you and put you to sleep. And do remember my buddy Dennis Carlucci's quick short presentation about decals. I'm very sure it'll be worth it. So keep an eye out for that one. Thank you and bye-bye.
And welcome back. We are back with the Peter Bach, and we have some questions from the chat. Have you ever built foam cradles for transporting structures?
No, I have never done that, but the principles apply. It's not going to be that hard. You just have to decide if you want it on its side or if you want to sitting on the base. I think that's all. And sometimes you can cheat a little bit and just make an egg foam crate and glue it to the top so that it does not move around.
Okay. Can you provide a suggestion for a low-cost foam cutter that others might want to use?
Besides the wire cutter, the Foam Factory wire cutter that I described, the only one that I can recommend is a used one on eBay. I didn't buy mine new, and it works just fine. These are products that are made for professional day in, day out applications, and so even if they have been used for quite some time, um, they're not dull, and they are quite serviceable.
All right. Do you have any issues with the foam breaking apart and getting stuck in models where it doesn't belong?
Yes, that's the main reason for making these, because especially the polyurethane foam will eventually decay in the presence of heat and moisture. So that's why I've gone to this polyethylene foam. That doesn't decay, that doesn't break down, that doesn't have any problems even 5 or 10 years down the road. I can't promise you that you won't eventually have to remake a foam crate, but as of right now, the styrofoam and the polyethylene foam, the black foam that I showed you, is it's quite durable and is time tolerant. It doesn't break down as easily.
This one's not from the chat, but just one of my own questions. Uh, do you recommend wrapping a model in like Tyvek or including some kind of like silica to remove moisture if you're storing a model in the transportation box?
In my profession, I have these silica gel packs that I can I just collect and I keep them in a dry place, and I pop one or the other in a crate if I'm going to I know I'm going to be archiving the model. Other than that, the buddies that I hang with, they all have temperature and climate control in their train room. They have dehumidifiers, they have humidifiers, they have thermostats set to a certain temperature. So there's not a lot of up and down. But like I said, if you're archiving it or if you're traveling in an area that's tropical and you know you're going to have some moisture problems, I think that would be the best solution, is get one of those silica gel packs.
Okay. Um, is the PE foam the same foam that a lot of manufacturers use between the handrails and the shell on new logos?
Yes, I believe that to be a PE foam.
Okay. And what sort of tools other than a foam cutter would you recommend?
You can use a really good knife. You're not going to get that smooth cut, but maybe you don't need that. If you don't have a lot of delicate parts that can break off easily, they won't get caught in a wave, and so that could be a solution. If it's thin foam, you can use a pair of scissors, and then kind of stack the foam and creating a type of yeah, a stack is the best word I can think of.
Is is there a good source for different densities of foam? Like if you wanted something that was soft versus more harder foam?
Yes. Um, the place where I go if I want a specific foam is McMaster Carr. Uh, they are they have every type of foam you could possibly want with different densities. However, you are going to pay for those, and uh, I'm a model railroader like all of you out there. I don't want to pay for anything, so I will try to scrounge up foam, and I kind of have this container of foam in my train room, and I try to use that, and I have a bunch of foam pieces that I can glue together and stack. If you want to glue the foam together, it doesn't matter if it's styrofoam or if it's polyurethane, polyethylene. I would recommend a product that's made by Uhu, UHU. It's a German company called POR, POR. So that's a really good adhesive that will not dissolve your foam.
Great. Any tips for ensuring that the foam doesn't grab a hold of small detail parts?
Um, just like Andy just suggested, you can wrap it in something, um, not so much, Saran wrap, but maybe something like a tissue paper, or you can even line the foam cradle if you want with velvet. You can make it a little bit bigger and then line it in velvet, and it will stay in place, and yet the velvet will protect it from breaking too much off. I've done that with moderate success. I still am working on how the folds are and how you line it perfectly without making it too bulky.
That's all of our questions. Thank you so much. This was really great. Thank you, Peter.
You're welcome. And highball to all of you.
And to you.
Hello, welcome to tonight's NERx drawing for two $50 gift certificates from tonight's longtime sponsor, Interaction Hobbies. We had plans to have Daryl Jacobs of Interaction Hobbies join us in the studio. Daryl is co-owner of the Interaction Hobbies, the sponsor for tonight's drawings. Daryl contacted us earlier today to let us know that his wife and he are going on an animal rescue mission today with the foster group that they work with. So Daryl didn't know if he was going to make it, and since he's not here, we can assume he could not make it. So Interaction Hobbies is dedicated to supplying high quality, unique kits and components. They are a husband and wife team with a love for all things miniature and a passion for the rails. Their backgrounds in design and aviation gives them a foundation for accurate, precise attention to detail and quality. Interaction Hobbies has details, structures, vehicles, and boats in N, HO, S, and O scale. Both laser cut and 3D printed items are in the catalog. I've bought a few of the detail items for planned structures and scenes for myself, and I'm really impressed with the quality. As was discussed during last night's roundtable discussion on 3D printing, the details get finer and finer, and Interaction's details are evidence of that. I have a small model that will be shown during tomorrow night's model showcase, and I want to thank Interaction Hobbies and Daryl for sponsoring NERx. Having sponsors helps attract viewers, see what's going on with the NMRA, the Northeastern region, and Interaction Hobbies, what we're all about, and to have some fun. So let's get to the drawing. For the viewers, the way the drawing will work is I will spin the wheel. The number corresponds to your entry number on a spreadsheet that was downloaded prior to going live here. And once this number is selected, I will find that number on the spreadsheet and announce the winner. Then I'll remove that number from the wheel and spin it again, announcing the second winner. Daryl will be contacting the winners, providing information on how to claim their gift certificates. So good luck to everyone. So let's give it the first spin. Number 43 is Ed O'Rourke. So congratulations to Ed. We'll remove the choice from the wheel and give it another spin. That is Scott Butwell. Scott will be, both Ed and Scott will have Daryl reach out to you and let you know how to claim your gift certificate. And that's it. Thank you again to Interaction Hobbies and Daryl for sponsoring NERx. And thank you for entering the drawing. And remember to enter tomorrow night's drawing. On to the next segment, Speed.
Welcome back. Congratulations to the Welcome back, and congratulations to the winners. And our last segment tonight is a layout tour of Bob Meckley's layout, the Denver and Rio